went on to Wilby up in the Adirondacks, and dropped out after a semester because I was accused of practicing witchcraft.
How did that happen? Well, I need to know were you burning incense in your room or something?
No, it was far less sexy. I was just asking questions, and I was pushing back against some of the bullshit. And finally, the dean of men called me in, and he said, "Look here, it says here in the Bible that rebellion is the same as witchcraft, and I will not have you practicing witchcraft here on my campus."
Oh my God.
And so I was kind of like, "Yep, hey, I got something in my pocket for you."
Hello and welcome to Growing Up Christian. I'm Casey.
And I'm Sam.
And we are enjoying Memorial Day weekend, doing family stuff. My sister and husband and my nephew came into town, and he's coming up on 2 this year. I think in August he's turning 2.
Oh, nice.
Like, my parents have been so excited that they're coming. You know, because it's been hard they've gone back to Atlanta a couple of times to see him and stuff, but he hasn't been able to come here. And so they've been steadily stocking up on toys. I think they've been stockpiling toys since since I was in high school or something like that.
Right.
In Home Alone 2, where he goes to he walks into the toy store and it's just like, whoa, magic music playing. I feel like that was my nephew coming into the house at my parents' place, just basketball hoop, t-ball. I mean, he's got trucks and cars and all of that stuff. He's got this little lawnmower that you fill with bubbles, and when you push it, it pumps bubbles out of the side.
Yeah. My kids had one of those. It
that
broke
is
early. It did not last long.
That's
such a good toddler toy, dude. He put some miles on that thing yesterday.
Yeah, man, it's so my kids are they're near both grandparents, so they love it. It's the grandparents love it. It's funny because just as much as anybody does, we've never really seriously considered moving from the area we're in. But every time we talk about it, we're like, man, it would feel if you live far away from your parents and you have kids, and it's that's just how the kids grow up. It's seeing the grandparents every once in a while, holidays when they fly out, whatever. That's just kind of the life you get used to. But even Jill and I were talking about it in the car, and we're like, hey, it'd be cool because we just would love the idea of living near the ocean, living on the ocean. In a place that's generally warm all the time, because Massachusetts just isn't fun for weather. And so we were talking about it, and they, my daughter's just like, but then we wouldn't be near Grammy. And we're like, yeah. And it's that's the first thing she thought of. And you're like, man, that would be really feel so terrible to make I know people do it and they move, and usually it's I don't know, if you have to move, you move. But I don't have one of those jobs that takes me somewhere new and says this is where you need to go now. But that'd be the hardest thing about moving, is just taking the kids away from family that's all real close.
Yeah, that would be tough. I think we moved several times when I was a kid, so I was a little used to it. But my grandparents on my dad's side would usually end up moving wherever we went.
Yeah.
So my grandpa and my dad, worked together in their business. So it was if we left the state, they were probably coming along pretty soon,
Yeah. Man, so I told you that my daughter, both my kids are in soccer, and they use this so they're teaching the kids how to kick the ball right. And I did soccer when I was a kid, and I don't really recall much about it. I don't recall anything I was taught. I did it for a little bit, just like most little kids do. But my kids, as they're learning how to kick, they pick a very strange metaphor to teach children how to kick a soccer ball. And I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on it. So they're like, all right, so they put the ball on the ground. And they're like, like how, what Mickey Mouse looks like, kids? And they're like, oh, yeah. And like, he's got the big ears. It's like, pretend like that's like Mickey Mouse laying on the ground. And when you run up, you stomp on his ear and then you kick him in the nose. Like the soccer ball is his nose. And that's like, all right, stomp on his ear,
word.
kick him in the nose. Stomp on his ear, kick him in the nose. And they just say it all day long. And I'm like, should I say something? That feels a little weird, a little aggro, but.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah.
And the kids are how old?
4, 5.
Oh man. Yeah, that's a weird way to teach it.
Yeah, I don't know. It came up. I thought I kept meaning to mention it because I was like, I wonder if anyone else had this experience of being taught to kick a soccer ball by pretending Mickey Mouse is laying on the ground and you just stomp on his ear and kick him in the nose.
Curb stomp Mickey Mouse, like we taught.
Yeah. So dumb. I think it's stupid. Even one of the coaches was like, I know it's kind of weird, but I think it's funny. We're like, that's cool that you think it's funny. I mean, it's not even funny, but it's also definitely a weird thing to teach 3, 4, 5-year-olds. But anyway, that's just me. I'm just one of those progressive piece of shit parents who's too sensitive. So, moving on, I don't really care to spend a lot of time on that, but I did want to tell a story that Jill and I were talking about last night. We were talking about short-term mission trips, and of course, those have come up a few times on the podcast because how can they not? They're a big part of the lives of evangelical youth. But my wife went on one in college. I don't think it was through Liberty, but Liberty kind of like promoted it. You know who was part of it was Ergen Canner. So for people who don't know or remember, Ergen Canner was like a campus pastor who did the Wednesday night church service for Liberty. He was a disgraced pastor. He told a lot of lies and they caught up with him eventually. So, but before that, he was, people really liked him. He was edgy. He was one of the, I don't know. He's just kind of like a dick, really. But people thought he was tough and cool. He probably had like, it's like a biker. He had like kind of a biker personality, I feel like, in some ways.
Yeah, he was entertaining. Like when you had to I took a New Testament class for him because you're obligated to. And I took Old Testament first with another guy, and it was so boring. It was miserable. And then I took Ergen Canner's New Testament class, which met for 3 hours once a week. So it was all in one shot.
Yeah.
And it was actually like not a bad class. I mean, it was kind of entertaining and stuff. And I think he was like one of the few like big, like high level staff members there that I actually like didn't mind listening to.
Yeah.
So when the story came out that, his entire origin story was fake.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my word. Yeah.
What's real?
Trust no one.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I had it for a Christian history class too. I mean, no doubt about it. The guy was smart. Like, so, disgraced pastor for sure. He had a lot of knowledge in his brain. Like he could recite a large portion of Christian history without having to like review texts and things like he was smart. So, I took the class with him and it was good. I remember learning a good bit. Of course, it's like catered towards like Reformation period and things related to where evangelical Christianity was born out of. But regardless, so there's this missions trip, and it's a missions trip cruise.
This is just getting a little too transparently vacation-y.
Yeah. And so when Jill signed up for it, I want to be specific that even at that point in our lives, she was like, I'm doing this to go on a cruise. Like, I want to go on a cruise. It's cheap because it's like in the name of Jesus. And she was able to just go on a cruise. So, but while they're on this cruise, they, and Hawk, I believe Hawk Nelson played on this cruise ship as well that week. I regret not asking John Steingart about that. I probably still should. I might have to hit him on Twitter or something, at him on Twitter, and ask if he remembers going on a Christian cruise with Ergen Canner associated with Liberty University. But so the intent was to go to different islands and go off on the islands for the day and do like your missions work, right? So you dock your cruise ship, and a bunch of white like kids just kind of trickle off, and they go spread the gospel to a bunch of poor kids, like who are just waiting there to hopefully get something from these people. It's really weird. So
serve.
Yeah, God. So, but they hit a tropical storm, and they only were able to dock once. They were not able to like go to do anything. But dude, that's just so fucked up. The one thing they did when they landed, and my wife and her friend refused to even do this. It was like when it was presented to them as how they were going to share the gospel with the children that day, my wife and her friend were like, there's absolutely no chance of doing that. They were handing out tracts to these kids that looked like dollar bills. So the kids think they're real money, and they're like flocking around the bus. Kids are throwing the money looking tracts out of the bus while they're driving, and kids are like running to pick them up, only to be crushed with disappointment when it's like spreading the gospel. Oh, it's like, what the fuck? Kind of dark, right?
Super dark. Oh my God. That is like, that's unbelievable. That might be like one of the worst ones I've ever heard. Like,
yeah. Because the people at the top who are like putting this trip together were like, what can we do to get people to like really go for these trips? Make them look like money. Then they'll come running for it. It's like to have a zero disconnect. I mean, to be able to not have like any human connection to like, they have to be sociopaths, right? To think that like this is a good idea.
Well, it's the means to an end, like it doesn't matter what happens to poor people's bodies. It's only matters that they end up in heaven with eternal life, so you can do that sort of thing because, your intentions are great.
Oh my God. So it's like you dock a cruise ship, which obviously in of itself screams, we have money and we're coming here to vacation. And a bunch of kids get off and they start slinging money all around. They're like, I mean, everything about that is, it's just, you're the setup, like to have no understanding of what the optics of that are, or to really, and to not see it as a problem is, I mean, I guess that's why we've dealt with colonialism for, a lot of human history. They're just like, this is great. We're great. You're going to love it. You're going to love us. You're going to see this ship coming in from a mile away, and you're going to anticipate these people coming in. And they just really believe that they have such an inflated ego about it. It's so wild.
Yeah. Depending on where you go, I mean, you could get real creative with it too. I mean, you could have some that look like meal replacement bars. It's like, how do you make a gospel tract appear to be like clean drinking water?
Yeah, I know. That's,
we could put that to use in the US even.
Yeah.
Like Flint, Michigan, just winging fake bottles of water out. And when, you open the cap and it's just like a message in a bottle.
Yeah.
Where will you go when you die? Which is probably imminent.
Yeah, which is going to happen soon because you don't have clean drinking water. But
dude, that's like the worst example I've ever heard, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
I had forgot about that. I remember her going on that when, because that was right after we started dating. This was a long time ago. I mean, it had to have been like sophomore year of college so that was, we're getting old now, man. So that was a good bit back. So I had forgotten all about the story though. And she rehashed it last night because I mentioned we had a conversation with somebody recently on an upcoming episode about short-term missions trips, and that's when that reignited that memory for her. I was like, oh yeah, I went on this cruise once. And I was like, oh shit, I forgot about that. Calling a cruise a missions trip is like one of the most like unveiled attempts of missionary work, of being a vacation for sure.
Yeah, it's like the missions equivalent of used car lots sending you that like ad that looks like a handwritten letter until you open it. Oh, you qualify for near nothing financing on your used Corolla.
Yeah. It's, and of course, I'm sure I don't know how many kids they took. There was like it obviously has a limit because you can only fit so many people on a cruise ship, but it was a cruise. I mean, the entire time they were on it, it was like there was like shows, and I mean, there's like you had all the food, you had the deck, like everyone would just hang out on the deck and chill by the pool. Like it was a legit vacation. And of course, you throw in the tropical storm where you couldn't actually dock and to only get off the boat once. You literally, of course, you couldn't really vacation hard in the middle of a tropical storm. Everybody had to be inside. There were actually people on deck. And she said it was pretty scary because like the waves were actually coming up over the deck of the cruise ship and like splashing the deck. Like, wow. I mean, it was a lot. Now, if those things, the way they're weighted, like it's not like they're getting tossed around by the ocean, right? But there was all the warning, like to get off the deck. Kids were all like on the deck thinking, this is cool. Wow, look at all this, like watching the waves and shit. And they're like, if you get hit by one of these waves, you will be sucked out into the ocean, you idiots. Like,
yeah, I think it depends on the boat too. Like my parents went on one when I was a kid for a work thing. And it was just like one that went in between the Hawaiian Islands. They were on it for like 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And it was a small ship. So it wasn't like one of these giant carnival ships like that. And they said it was awful. Just like tossed around, sick, like they just had a terrible time the whole time they were there. But
I have never really been much for... I've never done much on a boat. I've gone out on people's speedboats here or there or whatever. But I went on a whale watch once with somebody that owned a boat. This is when I was younger, and they were like, they had a cabin below deck, and they were just like, "Don't go below deck if you're not used to it. It gets like the swaying below deck will really make you feel sick." And I didn't really get it. And I had to use the bathroom, and I was like, so I just wanted to take a piss in the below deck in the cabin, whatever. And just going down there, taking a piss and coming back upstairs, I was finished. I had to lay down until we got back to shore. I was like, I am going to throw up. Like I felt horrible. It took like, that was probably what? 60 seconds of just watch, because like watching everything shift from side to side, like when you're on a boat and you're like looking out at the water, you see like the boat going up and down. It's like, but having like the sky view or like of everything and looking out into the ocean, you don't really pick up on how much you're bobbing up and down until you're like below deck in a cabin, watching it shift from side to side. Like you're holding on to stuff as you walk. You don't have any like sea legs or whatever. And man, I was like, that was the most nauseous I've ever felt in my life without actually throwing up.
I've never done well on boats, and neither does April, because we've tried to do a couple of different like day-long fishing trips when we've been near the ocean.
Yeah.
And we get like queasy and sick every time, regardless of what you take. And if you take like Dramamine or whatever it is, for motion sickness, like that's kind of like giving yourself the flu for the day. Like you're going to feel like garbage from taking that too.
Do you really? I've never taken it. That makes you feel sick?
It just makes you feel like tired and achy and awful.
Weird.
It's like hey, we can get ahead of the motion sickness by just making you regular sick.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when you're feeling nauseous and you try to take Pepto-Bismol, and it's just sort of like Well, you can wait and throw up, or you can throw up in 2 minutes and it'll be pink.
Yeah, right. Throwing up, I was always afraid of. And then, like, I know we talked about this when my kids were sick, but that feeling after it happens, when you're just like, it almost instantly feels back to normal. You're like, oh,
yeah,
glad that's like, it's like you want that to happen now. As an adult, when you feel nauseous, I'm like, can I just fucking throw up already and get this over with? Like,
yeah, just fist yourself in the throat.
Yeah.
Hurry it along. Well, that's actually like a thing where, you get like I'm reciting like third-hand information from a podcast here, so I might not be totally correct. What I've heard is that there's like a dopamine rush that comes after you throw up.
Okay.
So like
that makes sense.
That's part of why, people who struggle with bulimia have trouble with it. It's like, not only do you feel like you've counteracted the bad food choices you've made or something like that, but you also get like this rush afterwards that makes you feel even better. So it's like a level of relief that comes with it. And I think that's part of why people get so stuck in that cycle,
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like it makes sense. I'm sure there's I'm sure that has maybe a little bit to do with why you just generally feel better after you throw up too, if even without having struggling through an eating disorder, which obviously has other factors involved too, other than just that was a nice rush after I threw up. But
right. Yeah. I think it's like a secondary thing. And I am speaking totally out of turn here. So
you heard it from Dr. Casey. No.
Right. I got that honorary doctorate like Dr. Glenn Beck did from Liberty.
Dude, I remember, I don't think I told this story when I was in, like, this was a college for a weekend experience. I went to Liberty for college for a weekend. This is after I knew I was going to Liberty. I just did it because Jill was there and it was like a free weekend to go down to Liberty and see Jill. So, when you do college for a weekend at Liberty, you're supposed to go to like all the not events, but like they do stuff on the dorms. You stay on the dorms and they have like a meeting some of the nights and they try to get you involved in all of that. Like you're supposed to get the full experience of what it would be like if you were there. And I was skipping all of that because I already knew I was going to Liberty. I was just there for the free trip down and I was going to hang out with Jill. And on my way out, they were like, oh, well, we have like this meeting that you're supposed to be a part of. I was like, that's fine. I already am like, I'm not really here for that. So I'm just going to hang out with my girlfriend. And they were like, they do like just shitty college bond, like try to do like some team building exercises and they're always dumb. This one was someone was holding up like a habanero pepper and he was like, they're trying to get people to eat it. And they were like, all right, man, if you just eat this habanero pepper, then you can just like go. And I don't like peppers. I've never eaten a hot pepper in my life. And I was just like, okay, fine. Thinking for some dumb reason that they wouldn't have been doing something that could have really hurt you. And I took this thing, bit it, chewed it up, swallowed the whole thing, seeds and all. And immediately my face sinks and their jaws drop and they're just like, oh no, he ate it. And they're like, oh, he actually ate it. Shoot. And they start like panicking. And they're like, we were just messing with everybody. We didn't actually think anyone was going to eat this thing. Like, and they're like, or we thought you'd spit it out. It's like, oh my God. And so I go to the bathroom. My mouth is like on fire, dude. I'm talking snot is just draining from my nose. I'm drooling. My eyes are red and just pouring out tears. And I like just running water, cold water in and out of my mouth, like constantly. I'm like at the sink, like breathing in water. And one of them like runs out to grab a gallon of milk and they brings it. I start like just drinking a bunch of milk. And then they're like, you are going to die tomorrow if you don't throw this up. Like,
oh, that's such bad advice.
Yeah, they're like, and I could already feel like my stomach was burning, dude. I could feel it in my stomach. It hurt. It felt like someone lit a fire in my stomach. So I'm like, but they're just like, if you like, basically their argument was if you shit that out the next day, it's going to burn your asshole. And I don't know anything. So I like immediately start like, that was the first time in my life I had ever been able to like, the panic set in so much where it's like almost an involuntary motion of like fingers down the throat, push down as hard as you can. And I just vomited up everything. And like all the milk I just drank, the pepper came up, like everything. And finally, like I was able to like calm down, and I'd left and met up with Jill. She was like, it's like, I didn't even tell her about what happened. I don't really even know why. I was just like, oh, sorry, I was late. It's like, they wanted to like have me part of the stupid thing on the dorm for a second.
Dude, that's jumping in with both feet on the hot pepper thing.
Yeah.
Habaneros are rough.
Yeah.
And they taste bad.
Yeah.
Like that's like a pepper you cook with, not just eat. You know?
Like you use them for the heat. But I didn't even like peppers like that at all. I don't think I'd ever. It's like I just had no idea what I was doing when I ate that. But because I had like, I don't know, certain like habanero food, like, oh, something habanero, and it's always just like a spicy food, and those are always too much for me. I can't handle spice very much at all anyway. So to just like to have eaten that was like, I can really recall that as like the most pain I've experienced as an adult. Like I haven't had a lot, but that was up there.
That's so that was like one of those junior high kid things for me where it was like, I like hot stuff. This is going to be my personality now.
Yes, there's always that guy. There's always that guy.
So I was that guy. And so I was always eating like hot sauce or whatever, and I remember the grocery store near us had habaneros at one point. And I had just heard about those. I'd never like actually seen one before. So I bought like a pack of them, and I was doing that whole thing where I was like bringing them places and like, dude, you want to eat a hot pepper?
Yeah.
And they're rough, dude. They beat you up. And I remember eating one. There was this kid that was kind of a bully at school, and he was dating my buddy Jesse's sister at the time, or courting, or whatever you want to call it. So we were at Jesse's house, and I had some of these peppers with me, and we kind of did like the whole like, oh man, you up to it? You up to the challenge? Don't be a wimp. Eat this pepper to the bully kid, right? And so he and I both agree we're going to eat one at the same time. So we eat them. It's awful. Like, burns really bad, everything. And then, we're going to a basketball game that night. Like we had to play basketball that night. And dude, I just gave myself like the worst stomach ache coupled with like crippling diarrhea before this basketball game. And I think I managed to play worse than I normally did at basketball.
It would have been the only thing that would have made that story better is if you actually shit your pants while playing basketball.
Okay, so we don't have time for this today.
Put a pin in it.
But your missions trip deal, I have a missions trip story that like it's like legendary status with some of my friends, and everybody's been asking me when I'm going to tell my Mexico missions trip story. So I'll do that next week when we've got the time to adequately convey the humiliation. And
I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to that. So our guest this week is author, blogger Benjamin L. Corey. He wrote, he's got 2 books. One's called Undiluted, Recovering the Radical Message of Jesus, and the other one is called Unafraid, Moving Beyond Fear-Based Faith. And he is the author. He's a guy. His blog is called Formerly Fundy. So he's another, formerly fundamentalist kind of Christian turned progressive Christian. He has had a lot. He had a lot to say. And he's got an interesting story that a lot of it was news to me. I'd been following his work for a number of years. We get into that. I had kind of followed his blog almost from the start, and to hear some of the twists and turns of his life was fascinating. Some of it very difficult, but he's got an amazing journey, and he was very open and honest with us about that journey and all the hardships and the ups and the downs. And it was beautiful. It was wonderful. And I'm super thankful for his honesty about all of it. I think it's going to be beneficial for a lot of people who have had particular struggles through faith, post faith, whatever it is. There's a lot in here, and I'm thankful that he was so up for getting into the nitty gritty of some of it. So, what do we want to tell you before we sign off and jump into it? Jump into the Discord, leave us a review on iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, do all that. It'd be really great. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. It's all available. It's all out there. And
Sam, against his every whim, just started us a TikTok, so we're gonna give that a try. Deconversion Therapy has a killer TikTok. Their videos are hilarious. So we're taking a page out of their book since they've kind of mastered the medium.
Yeah. And I have been resistant to TikTok forever. I don't want to use it at all. But I'm going to try, even though I feel, I guess everyone's on it now. Part of me still feels like it's not for me, but that's not true. TikTok's for everybody. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll jump into our conversation with Benjamin L. Corey. Hey, everybody. We are back with our guest, Benjamin L. Corey. Ben, thanks so much for hanging out with us this evening. It's good to see you.
Oh, absolutely. No, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me to come on.
Yeah. So, Ben, you are, author, blogger. I got to know you through blogging years ago on Patheos. Patheos was like many people like me, as after that was found, that was a big time catalyst for reevaluating some of your beliefs, because there was a lot going on there.
Oh, for sure. No, I mean, I think I started in, I think it was, 2015 or, late 2014, early 2015. And, I was still in seminary at the time. It was summer, was, working at a church, although not getting paid, and just decided, you know what, I'm going to start a blog today. And somehow wound up at Patheos. And I fell in love with Patheos because they were truly hosting the conversation on faith. And it was originally run by some just really amazing people. And it's just kind of sad where things went, after a while. But
yeah. That was kind of weird too. For people who don't know, it got bought out by like a conservative Christian group, isn't that right? And then they kind of changed some rules about how things worked.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't so much say it's a conservative Christian group. It's more that, it was a private company who also owned some conservative stuff, and there were some conservatives there. They didn't have a problem with the liberalism. It was more that it was too business to them, and that the folks who originally owned it, they truly just wanted to create this space where we talked about ideas. And with the new ownership, it was, oh no, we need clicks, this, that, it just doesn't matter. And so, they just lost the passion for quality content. Patheos had been kind of an invite-only place where everything was kind of carefully curated. And it just kind of turned more into like a Christian blog spot. And so, I tried to change it from the inside out, and had worked there as the Progressive Christian Channel manager for a couple of years during their transition from old ownership to the new ownership. But after a while, I just had to tap out and go solo.
Okay, that makes sense. I can see that now, because I thought that was, my understanding of it was definitely a little off, because when I'm looking at, I expected to see some content changes, and when that never happened, I was like, maybe I am wrong about how this played out, because
they, as individuals, they were on the more conservative side. But from my standpoint as an insider, they really didn't care, about it wasn't so much the content. They just wanted more clicks, know. And so and when you do that, you just continually sacrifice quality. And the more you do it, the more you sacrifice quality. And it just got to the point where it was so, unpersonal, and just kind of poorly managed.
Yeah. So one of the things I find interesting about people like you who found kind of blogging at that point
Mm-hmm.
is, and at you said you're in seminary, like doing it for that long within the Christian atmosphere. There's so much that changes over that
Mm-hmm.
period of time, especially if you're in a more progressive bent. You continue to like evolve and evaluate your beliefs, and they change over time. So like when you decided to start getting to blogging, were you already making those shifts?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess actually a better place to start is the type of Christianity you grew up in.
Sure. So, well, I mean, my blog formerly, famously called formerly Fundy, so kind of started that whole term there. But yeah, so I mean, I grew up in my early days. I grew up in rural Maine. The son of multi-generation dairy farmers. And so we were, very conservative, but I wouldn't quite say fundamentalist. But certainly, all the toxic, evangelical stuff, but not all the way over to the other side. And it was when I was in high school that I got kind of tangled up with this organization called Word of Life Bible Institute.
Yes, my
From
wife went
Spoon
there.
Lake, really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh! So yes, I was a Woolby person, and
Oh, great.
that was how I got into fundamentalism. And I actually did 2 mission trips with them when I was in high school. 1992 to Russia and Ukraine, and 1993 to Hungary, Romania, and Poland. Yeah, I mean, they were amazing experiences. But then in '94, after graduating high school, I went on to Woolby up in the Adirondacks, and
Yep.
dropped out after a semester because I was accused of practicing witchcraft. uh,
How did that happen? Well, I need to know were you burning incense in your room or something?
No, it was far, far less sexy. I was just asking questions, and I was pushing back against some of the bullshit. And finally, the dean of men called me in, and he said, "Look here. It says here in the Bible that rebellion is the same as witchcraft, and I will not have you practicing witchcraft here in my campus."
Oh my God.
And so I was kind of like, "Yep, hey, I got something in my pocket for you." And I went home for Christmas, and I was like, "There's no way in hell I'm going back there." So as soon as Christmas was over, I joined the military.
Do you think he
Wow.
was like actually suspicious of you doing witchcraft, or was it just like, I need to get rid of this guy and this is how I'm going to justify it?
No, he wasn't. He was trying. He was just trying to make the point that at Word of Life or in all these fundamentalist circles, it's the person that asks the questions like, "Hey, wait, why do we do this?" Or wait, why do we think this? I say in one of my books that they kind of treat it like it's a contagious disease, and that everybody panics. I mean, I wrote this obviously way pre-COVID, but it's kind of like, oh my gosh, get a mask on this guy, or this shit's gonna spread. And so he was much more trying to make the point that, biblically speaking, my rebellion was no different than, sacrificing a goat to Lucifer.
It's just an ideological contagion.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I wasn't even that smart then. I was just like asking questions and pushing back against stupid rules. And like,
They had
what's
some
the
good
point of
rules.
this? Oh my goodness.
I remember when my wife was there, people could like you can't hold hands, so they would like hold different ends of the same stick that they found on the ground outside their door.
That's funny. So no, that's really the kind of shit that we would do. Yeah, no, you're not allowed to touch. If you're engaged, you can hold hands. If you're married, you can kiss. But you can't even get engaged without the dean's permission. Like they have to like bless and approve everything.
Wow.
And no, like yeah, no touching. We had famously a third party rule that guys and gals cannot leave campus without a third party because clearly if you're heading to the post office, you might stop off for some sex on the way. I mean, it's kind of funny because in their attempts to stop us from doing things, they certainly put a whole bunch of stuff in my head.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't thought about half the stuff that they were worried I was going to do.
Well, our one of our this comes up a few times, so we'll bring it up again. We've brought up the book as Preparing for Adolescence by Dr. Dobson a good few times. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but
Yes.
he has this part in the book where he talks about when you're going through puberty, like you're going to notice women, like girls, and you're going to think their bodies are attractive, and you might even find their feet attractive. And we're just
hilarious.
Yeah. And you're like, okay, he's definitely single-handedly responsible for putting the concept of foot fetishism into a bunch of boys.
It definitely taught me what masturbation was.
Really?
I just wish there was better pictures, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. See, I taught myself. I didn't have. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. But
man. So you left, I mean, Word of Life, and how long were you in the military for?
I was in the military for 10 years.
Oh, wow. And was theology, Christianity, was all that something that was like part of your life during that time? Or did you kind of like drift into it afterwards?
Well, I would say so. It was an interesting time. During those years in the military, I didn't really go to church, but it wasn't so much that I was like, I'm done with church, I'm deconstructing, or it wasn't anything like that. It was more than just, I was in the military for 7 of the 10 years I was overseas, and with limited options as far as churches go. I think when I left Word of Life, I knew that there was just something rotten about right wing Christianity. But the thing is, oftentimes we leave these circles. We say, "Geez, this smells rotten. I can't stand it. I'm done with it." But we don't yet have the conscious awareness that we have taken all of like those patterns of thinking with us. And even still so much of the theology with us. So even though I, at that point I had kind of a bad, taste in my mouth for conservative Christianity, I was still very conservative. I still thought, in so many ways, in some of the, thought patterns, and, just didn't have the conscious awareness of it. So it was quite a long time after that. It was a few years after the military that I started my deconstruction.
Okay. So what sparked seminary for you then? Because what was the catalyst for that then?
Well, even with that experience, for me, there's always been something about the person of Jesus that I just can't get enough of. That it's always fascinated me. He's always seemed amazing to me. Everything about Jesus, I've just been totally in love with it. And that never went away. So I loved church. I loved trying to teach Jesus. I loved all of that stuff. I loved preaching and speaking. I've often told people that if there's any decent skills that I have that have helped me be successful, it wasn't 10 years in seminary. It was my senior year in high school. I took theater and public speaking. Because there are plenty of other people that have all the same credentials I have, but so I was really grateful for those experiences. But yeah, I really wanted to serve the church. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet. I knew there was something about being a pastor that I both loved and hated, or feared maybe. I think it's probably a fear of rejection preemptively. But I don't know. I love Jesus. I love what it was all about, and so just decided to go on to seminary.
Yeah. Did your like spellcraft suffer during that period, or did you balance it?
In seminary was the difference between Bible school and seminary is just night and day. However, so the funny thing is, though, when I first got to Gordon Conwell, I did 2 master degrees at Gordon Conwell, a master's in theology and master's in intercultural studies, and then I went on to Fuller and did my PhD at Fuller, my doctor of intercultural studies. But so when I first got to Gordon Conwell, I remember going for kind of the campus visit for prospective students. And I was actually still far more of the old pattern of thinking because, the acting president of the time was a man named Haddon Robinson. And half the reason why I wanted to go was to learn to preach from Haddon Robinson. He was considered, one of the great preachers of the 20th century. But he mentioned in his speech, that night that there were over 100 denominations represented. And I was like, how the hell can there be 100 denominations here? How can you teach the truth and have that much diversity? Like, what the hell is going on here? So I was actually like, man, I was skeptical going into it, because, the only thing I knew up to that point coming out of conservative Christianity and fundamentalism was that you go to Bible school to memorize the answers.
Yeah.
I was not prepared to actually get a theological education, to wrestle with theology, to be formally trained in Greek and Bible translation. I wasn't ready for any of the stuff that comes with that. And that's what really blew my mind.
Yeah, we so Casey and I both went to Liberty University, that's where we met. But
Okay.
I remember, so I got a Bible degree at Liberty, and of course, even a Bible degree at that point, probably not much different than Bible school, where they say,
Mm-hmm.
they just teach you what the right answers are,
Right.
what they think the right answers are, and then seminary is still the same thing for them. There, it's still like
Mm-hmm.
Southern Baptist. It's like you go there to learn, and it's interesting because I know plenty of people who went to it. I know plenty of people who went to other conservative seminaries or even then people who went on to liberal seminaries, and it really is. It's hard to work around it. There is just a line of thinking that says, like, these conservative schools, theologically speaking, like Liberty, where it's like if you go to seminary and you're still just being told they nuance it a bit, right? Because it's not just
Right.
like these are the right answers. Now write a paper saying the exact same things we
Mm-hmm.
want you to. They give you some wiggle room, but you got to ask the questions the right way. And at the end of the day, if you're not walking away thinking within a certain parameter like that, then it is a cause for concern, right? So you don't have a lot of people walking out of Liberty University Seminary publicly speaking about how they're accepting of the LGBTQ community or anything like that, right? And I always find that interesting because seminary was like what I thought about going. It was on getting a Bible degree. What else are you supposed to do at that point?
Sure.
And it was like having that idea of just kind of continuing to be told for the next 4 years what the truth is and not getting a lot of wiggle room there was always interesting to me.
Yeah, no, I would have, on one hand, I would have hated that. On the other hand, I may have thrived, and my life probably would be a lot better than it is, perhaps, because, it all started to fall apart back then in some ways, or fall together, maybe to reframe. But yeah, I mean, even though Gordon Conwell was a conservative seminary, there was totally that freedom. I mean, one of the best grades on a paper I got, the entire paper I wrote, like rebutting the professor. But like he's like, no, this is well done, well reasoned, well articulated, researched, and so they appreciated it. If you had like solid academic research and to back up what you're trying to say. But I was, but I did start deconstructing there at Gordon Conwell, and I think the first big thing for me was it was within like the first week or two of seminary. All of a sudden I'm sitting in class and it was either a professor or a student, or I think it was a professor, like made a joke about like the rapture, and everyone laughed as if like people who believed in it were idiots. And I was like, wait a minute, like what? Wait, huh? I was like, I didn't know there was another option. How can you be a Christian and not believe in the rapture? And so, started digging in there, and finding out that it's not part of historic Orthodox Christianity or in the Bible. And that, the first Christians would think we were nuts about that kind of stuff. And, I think conservatism or fundamentalism's fear is that, well, we don't want kids to think our faith is like a house of cards, where if something unravels, it all does. But with the way that they try to force us to hold it together, it's almost as if they create a house of cards where they don't need to. You have like Ken Ham, like, well, if this is not true, then what the hell else is not true? It must all be false, where, man, I think that there's room to like look at this card and be like, you know what? This card is beautiful and authentic. And you know what? This one was put in here by some jackass in the 1800s from England. And we just, for us, we just kind of think it's always been there. So let's go ahead and take that one out. but I just realized though, I mean, within my first semester at seminary, I was like, holy smokes, half the tough stuff that I was taught as a kid is either not completely true, or it is something that is just our opinion, where there are other like very reasonable, viable, biblical alternative views, which I was never presented, never told. I mean, we were taught that people who, prayed in tongues were possessed by demons. And, then all of a sudden when like, I have friends who are charismatic, I'm like, man, like these people love Jesus. Like, huh? So I just realized that everything was up for questioning. The very thing that they were afraid of, like they created in me. Long story short, I got to the end of my first degree, my theology degree, and I just kind of said to myself, I'm graduating, but I don't know if I know what I believe anymore. But what I do know is that I am still as interested in Jesus as I was on day one, as a little kid first hearing about him. So I just decided to kind of start my faith all over again, and to like literally like build it on Jesus, which it's kind of sad that has to be some kind of novel idea.
Right. It's so funny.
He says some inconvenient things, like sell all your stuff and, give it to the poor. And it just doesn't really jive with, the traditional fundamentalist Christianity.
Oh my gosh, man, if I could like summarize like what it was like after I got back after 10 years of like seminary, it would be like, well, boy, we're so proud of you. You went, you did 10 years. Jeez. Get up there and preach. Tell us what's the most interesting thing you learned about the Bible in 10 years. I'd be like, well, was really taken back by how like Jesus was just so filled with compassion for people, and taught us to welcome the immigrant and to care for the poor, and to, this and that. And then they'd be like, you scripture twisting socialists, get the hell out of here. You'll never understand the Bible because the Holy Spirit's not interpreting and teaching you, So it's like, you know what? I'm done with you guys.
Oh my God. That's such a loaded thing, man. You're triggering us. No, like that idea that's so fun. I hadn't even thought about that in a little while, to be honest, is like the idea, like it's like the whole, I remember hearing that a lot now. It's coming all back to me, like that it's the Holy Spirit that interprets scripture as you read it. And that a particular evangelical thing is that, with that works really well with giving everybody the ability to read the Bible, right? Mm-hmm. Evangelical criticism of other denominations is that the people don't read the Bible. And I don't know if that's entirely true, but they don't put as much, well, I would definitely say they don't put as much stock in their ability to understand it appropriately. And what I've learned a lot about is like, that evangelical narrative is, once that's instilled in you, I guess I shouldn't say it's necessarily just that, but it, like all narratives, if you have one that's really like that's instilled in you and it's very hardlined, you can't read anything in the Bible without extrapolating that, right?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I once wrote a post, called 5 Things You're Reading When You're Reading the Bible, just because there are so many different things that we read into it. You have just cultural, context that is just so significant. I mean, how can you read a historical document, that is, talking about, first century Israel without actually understanding first century, Israel? How do you read, about the Bronze Age nomads if you don't understand Bronze Age goat herders? How? But then there are other contexts, things that we read. And I think a great example is hell itself. We in English, we read the word hell and we conjure in our minds what we've been told hell is. And so we repeatedly read that into the Bible. No one ever tells you that there are 3 different words, and just because English happens to suck in some ways, we render them all as hell instead of like the 3 different specific things that it's talking about, which is not hell. A word that didn't exist for almost like 400 years later in the understanding that we have it now. So we're constantly reading those things into the Bible without ever knowing it. because but that's the way it is with language. We would do that with other documents, other texts too, and that's why historical scholarship is an important part of that process.
Yeah.
I really I would say only recently, after I left the faith and all of that, only recently did I even know that there was large groups of people that didn't believe that hell was a physical place, or that, when you brought up a second ago, there's just so many things that I think that was other denominations baffled us, because we just couldn't understand how someone could read what we were reading and come out with a different interpretation.
Sure.
And it was always kind of disturbing, wow, it's just, it's people being misled. That was what explained every denomination,
Exactly. I know. And no, that was kind of the way I was baffled too. Anybody that didn't think like us. But yeah, I think the hell issue is just a great example where it's almost like I saw it in one way, and then all of a sudden I actually look at the book itself, and there's common sense things that all of a sudden stand out to me, beyond just the linguistics part of it. For example, in our version of Christianity we grew up in, of course, it's hey, the whole narrative boils down to you are a sinner, no such thing as a good person. If you were to die today and given justice, where would you go? So we have this whole narrative about hell and the necessity of Jesus on the cross. And then, so I look at the Bible and I'm like, so wait a minute. If that is the central theme, why is it not discussed at all in the Old Testament at all? Why did God wait so long to tell us about it if this is the case? And then even in the New Testament, of course, when you look at the early church, you look at the book of Acts, they don't go around preaching hell. They do go around preaching repentance, being returned to God. They do preach that there will be a judgment from God, but they don't mention hell at all in this early evangelicalism. And so I was like, good heavens, how did we get this entire thing, this entire core theology, when it is not that way when you look at the actual book itself?
Yeah. And it almost required us to walk through the world with such a suspicion of everybody else who came to a different conclusion. And I think I still struggle with that even to this day, is when I see people thinking differently than me. I know that's just there's part of that's just a human thing. There is that human aspect of us where people think differently, and you're like, how can I get them to think like me? Of course, that's part of human nature. But I think there was definitely an increase because the stakes were so high, given the whole hell thing, that you were so confident that you were reading it right and that you understood it so properly. And that, just the slightest misstep, and they wouldn't say it like that. They'd be like, well, only God knows somebody's heart. But they put so much emphasis on a small handful of things that the slightest misstep from those, even though God was the only one who knew their hearts, you were still worried about their soul. And
oh, for sure.
That's made me a big dick in college. I'm surprised I had friends, but I remember arguing nonstop. I'll never forget an argument I had with one friend outside. We were at a show. Shut the fuck up, Sam Shipman. We're at a show for entertainment, and you can't stop getting into theological arguments with people. Yeah. And it had to do with missions. It had to do with a friend of mine said something to the effect of I just can't really buy into the idea that if people live somewhere in a place where they've never heard any of these things, that a God would send them to hell. Right. And boy, did I have the right Liberty University answer for him. And
for the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, and no man is without excuse.
Yeah. I blamed us. I put that burden on on every single person who wasn't jumping on a plane and going over to their telephone. And that's, what was it, John Chow? That's how you get people like John Chow.
What I always found interesting about that, though, is that they would cite Romans as saying, well, nature declares there's a God, and that's enough to judge you to hell. But if you respond in the best way you can, that's not enough to get you to not go to hell. You know what I mean? It's enough to condemn, but not enough to save. No, the saving can only be with explicit knowledge. And, I think, Rob Bell famously asked, what if the missionary gets a flat tire?
Yeah. So I forgot about that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Rob definitely got me in a lot of trouble back then.
Yeah.
Reading his stuff.
Yeah, he got a lot of us into trouble. That's funny.
He's a gateway.
Then, so you were a pastor for a little while, right? Post seminary?
Yeah, well, I was part of a church plant where I was a teaching elder. So we called it teaching elder.
Okay.
So I was, didn't last very long. In that, obviously, I started blogging and ruined my life. But I mean, I loved it. I mean, we had, I was married, a daughter, tight group of friends, small group. It was just really, really finally like the community that we had longed for so many years. But then, gosh, long story short, I mean, there was one day where it just all imploded. And it was largely over an interview that I did on Huffington Post Live. It was a TV show on pro-life hypocrisy, talking about the death penalty in Texas at that time. They were hitting some record numbers, and I'd written a lot about pro-life hypocrisy. And man, things really went south. I mean, there was literally a Sunday where a woman stood up and was yelling and wagging her finger about, he said Christians should support a higher minimum wage. And she was so mad. It was like you would have thought that like I had said Jesus had a daddy and his name was Frank. But I'm like, really? Then the other thing was, it was also when I was really, truly encountering and starting over with Jesus and becoming passionate about nonviolence when I realized that this is so very much what Jesus taught. And, nice gun, Casey, by the way. Shane and I would love to turn that into a garden tool.
We just talked to Shane.
Not that one.
Oh, that's awesome. No, we love doing that stuff. I got a forge out back and an anvil, and I actually get a bunch of guns from the state of Maine after they've been confiscated in crimes, and still have the evidence tags on them, and I kind of pray over them before pounding them to. But nonetheless, but on that topic though, I had suggested we didn't even get to the point where we made it policy. We had suggested that maybe some of the people should leave their guns in the car instead of bringing them into worship.
Ooh, controversial.
That was no, man, that one was controversial. That was literally met with, oh yeah, I'll take my gun and my money and I'll go to a different church that wants both of us. So
just treating you like they're a McDonald's that was rude to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was just so discouraging though, in that, I mean, I don't know. Before, this is a community that kind of sent me off to seminary. And back then, is be like, hey, look at this guy. He went to Bible school. Listen to him preach. Wow, it's so great. It's like, here I go to seminary, get a PhD, and it's like, look, this is the dumbest guy you're ever gonna meet. It's just if what they wanted was you to come back with just to memorize all the answers they already had and be able to say them in a way that made them feel excited. They didn't mean actually come back and like teach the Bible and teach Jesus, because there just wasn't room for Jesus. So no, the people up and left and took their money with them, and the church kind of fell apart. And then we hid out for a couple of years with Congolese refugees, which was so awesome. We had found out that there was a nice Congolese refugee community here. This is rural Maine. And really? There's an article in the paper about how poorly they were being treated. And so decided to go to worship one day and, introduce myself to the pastor and apologize for how they'd been treated by so many in our community. And really, really super nice guy, and asked us to keep coming back. And so we ended up just hanging out with the refugees and, worshiping in Lingala, and which was really incredible. But then that kind of came to an end, and that there's at one point the pastor had come to me. He's like, listen, we're refugees. We're all broke. I need to go out of town for a couple of months to make some money for rent and heat and all that stuff. Will you kind of, lead things and take over things while I'm gone? I said, listen, I'm not comfortable being the one white guy as the leader of a refugee community. I said, but here's what I'll do. I know you got to go. I'm like, I will help you raise up. I'll help you train a pastor from your own community. and I'll help you with that process. I will help you with the transition. I'll do whatever it takes. I cannot for any long period of time be like the one guy in charge. It has to be with the intention that you guys are doing it all yourself. And so he's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. He's like, they were meeting in the basement of a local church here in Maine called Grace Church which is ironic in the end. So I had never met, anybody from that church before, the pastor or anything like that, because we just met in the basement, later on in the afternoon on Sundays. And so he's like, well, I need to introduce you to the pastor who owns the building so he knows what's happening while I'm gone. And we sat down to breakfast and, shook the guy's hand. And the guy, started putting cream in his coffee. He looked at me. He said, Benjamin L. Corey, I know who you are. I need you to tell me what you think about homosexuality.
Oh, my God.
I'm like, for the love of God.
You really do have all the wrong answers.
Yeah. And so, I tried to, just explain the theological tension and nuance. And at that time, I hadn't even, crossed over into fully affirming yet. I was still, very much on my journey. But at the same time, I couldn't figure out why I was even worried about it. This was a Congolese community, very conservative. If you're worried that I'm going to influence them on that's probably not happening. But I didn't want, I wanted to serve the refugee community, even though I didn't share all of their theological beliefs. I just really wanted to support the refugees. He, we tried to have a conversation, and basically he said, I don't think that the elders would like someone being in our church who makes their living tearing down the bride of Christ. He's like, because that's, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. I'm like, I'm not tearing her down. She just behaves poorly in public. It's like, and so he just said, I would really hate to have to tell the refugees they can't use our building anymore because you're worshiping.
Oh my God. That's super fucked up. They leveraged that against you.
So
That's
fucked
awful.
up. And those were his exact words. His name was Dave, and he was an asshole. And I don't mind saying his name because, if they, didn't want to be in the stories, they should have behaved differently when the story was being written.
I like that mentality.
This guy, it was stunning. And so here I was so screwed because I just had this heart for the refugee community. And the last thing I wanted was to just ghost them after they had, welcomed me in and made my family part of their community. But now I was in the position where I had to leave the community in order to protect them. Because, if rule number one is do no harm, I didn't want to risk doing harm to them by worshiping with them, as fucked up as it was, So that was the last time that I attended any church. I mean, other than a random service, here or there. That was kind of one of the last blows for me.
Wow.
At least here in this area.
So about what year? Okay, so just to get pieces together a little bit, when your church imploded, about what year was that? The church that you had built up?
That would have been right when I started blogging.
Okay.
So right around 2015.
Okay.
Or maybe 2014 actually. And so probably 2015, 2016 was the time period when I was with the refugees. And then after that, it was just toast.
Yeah. So, but you continued to blog, and you were writing books at that time.
Yeah. Yep. I was continuing to blog. I just had kind of so much to say from seminary and this and that. I had my last book, Unafraid, that came out in 2017, Moving Beyond Fear-Based Faith. And then in the last couple of years since then, I've kind of, in hindsight, taken a sabbatical that I'm anxious to end. I just had gone through a divorce, which was really difficult. A lot of pressure on life and a lot of difficulty and loss.
I didn't know that.
Especially loss of community. And so, as Unafraid came out, just kind of going through divorce and struggle with depression and things like that. But I've been, since January, I've been doing this new depression treatment called Sopravito. It's actually ketamine, the new nasal spray they do for depression.
No way.
Yeah. So they came out. It's this new angle of the role of psychedelics in depression treatment, which I am incredibly interested in.
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot more about that lately. Like, it
Oh,
seems like
wow.
there's been more trials going on. I know it's still like
Mhm.
psychedelics is still kind of Schedule 1 in the US, aren't they? Or is
For
that
sure. So the ketamine nasal spray is technically a tranquilizer, but it has some psychedelic, edges to it. It's very limited, where you can get it. You have to do it, in the office, and, it takes 2 hours. You're hooked up to a blood pressure monitor the whole time. I initially had, a lot of really good effect from that. In that, I don't know. There's something about this psychedelics where you end up going into this place inside of you where you do a lot of the difficult processing and work that you've needed to do and releasing that. And so, that's been incredible about ketamine. But I'm also incredibly interested in learning to microdose mushrooms.
Mhm.
So that is kind of the next thing on my horizon that I'm getting ready to play around with. Which, of course, inspired by, we were talking about that pre-show before we started recording. Here in my office here in Maine, I have a picture of Doug Forsett on my wall. Um, so to fill you in, Casey, and any of you guys out, any folks listening, so I absolutely love The Good Place. They
Yep.
have all 4 seasons, I think, on Netflix. And so basically, The Good Place, starring Kristen Bell and Ted Danson. The basic premise is this woman, Ellen Shellstrops, gets into the good place. Within a day, finds out they have her mixed up with another Ellen because she's really a shitty person and shouldn't be there. Um, and it's everything that happens since then. But in the very first episode, when she first gets to the good place, she's in the Archangel Michael's office and sees this picture. And she says, "Who's that?" He says, "That's Doug Forsett." And she said, "Who's Doug Forsett?" He said, "Oh, well, Doug's the one that got the closest guess." He said, "Doug was a stoner kid that lived back in Calgary back in the 70s. And one night he and his friend Randy got high on mushrooms. And Randy said to him, 'Hey, what do you think happens to us when we die?' And he said, 'You know what?' And somehow Randy just launched into this long diatribe where he got like 94% correct." And so this was a picture hanging in Michael's office. It says, "Doug Forsett, Calgary, closest guess, 10/14/72." And it just reminds me that, I love the Bible, love Jesus, love theology, but I'm still just doing my best to make my closest guess, just like Doug was.
Yeah, I love it. I need to get one of those. I need a Doug
Oh, it's awesome. I
poster for
love it.
my
I do think that
trophy.
I think that the psychedelics stuff is going to be like a whole new frontier of treatment for different things.
I agree with you. It really is. There are so many new studies coming out, so many new studies. And, other countries, are already catching on to this. But I think that even a university, I think in Massachusetts, was beginning a program to continue to study it. And so, the role of psychedelics in treating depression has been a huge untapped resource, and we are finally beginning to understand some things. I've been, lately just, soaking in any information, in any study I can on psilocybin,
Yep.
magic mushrooms. And I mean, gosh, what they are finding, in those smaller doses, the microdoses, that has all of the impacts that some of other these things like ketamine have on depression. And for people who have, what's called drug resistant depression, which is technically what I've had because it just doesn't respond to, SSRIs or any of the other kind of medications. And these kind of things can be incredibly helpful, because we have so many. I was just, I had a treatment this morning and I was telling the nurse practitioner that administers it, I said, I just feel like in our culture, in our language, we have too limited of a way to describe depression. We just have that one word. I'm like, well, but what if it's not just that? What if it's that I have a lot of reasons to be sad? What if it's I have a lot of grief, a lot of
Mhm.
losses that I've faced. And those are like real reasons that you can't just medicate. Yes, a medicine can help with some symptoms. No medicine is going to ease the pain of like being banished from my community and losing all of my friends and my marriage falling apart. There's no medicine for that. And what I love about psychedelics, and I was never a recreational drug user, so this is, my experimenting for depression has been my first, experience with any of this. What I really love about it is that, just like this morning, I took my nasal spray, and it was just a mini kind of 2 hour trip where you just almost go inside your mind, and there's this feeling of contentment, and then you start to process. And I was just kind of flooded with thoughts and feelings today of like, you know what, it's going to be okay. Like you can overcome all of these challenges. Like you're going to heal. It's going to be okay. And so it wasn't even so much the medicine; it's the mental process that you go through on some of these psychedelics that really, I think, promotes healing. So
Yeah.
I'm so excited, for the future of them, and I'm excited to do some experimenting with microdosing mushrooms here very soon.
That's
Yeah.
good. That one's like really interests me too, because I mean, there's like I never really had like a party phase, and like the little bit of like goofing around we've done with edibles and things like
Mhm.
that. Like one of the coolest things about it that people don't really talk about that much is like I feel like it's like thought pattern interruption. It's
Yes.
like there's so many things that you do that you never even consider another way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Simple things, even like menial tasks. You have those thoughts that interrupt the pattern, and all of a sudden you realize like,
Mhm.
oh man, like I never looked at it that way. This is so much easier. This is more efficient, and I feel
Mhm.
like um, weed in particular, but like edibles especially
Mhm.
I feel like you just have these unique thoughts that you just don't have
Mhm.
with when you're sober, and that's where I feel like microdosing could be really cool because it's like it's not a debilitating effect.
Right.
It's just that you're it's like you're changing the lenses out in your glasses almost.
For sure,
You
for
know,
sure. And that's where I think, microdosing, could be great. I also think that there is value in like a trip itself, beyond, microdosing. Because I mean, that again, that's what I had kind of with the ketamine this morning. But so with the ketamine though, the nasal spray, is technically esketamine for the depression. But what they have found in some of the initial studies is that even if some people don't experience like a real shift in their mood, they do experience a disruption of thought patterns. And what I can say hands down is 100% true, and I was as shocked as anyone that it happened, was I used to think about killing myself 5 times a day. I mean, no joke. There'd be days where I'd be like, all right, let's have our coffee. At the end of the day, today will have been a good day if I only think about hanging myself 5 times or less. And like I had to get through some days judging it like that. Well,
Oof.
after my very first dose of esketamine, it was like it shut the part of my brain off that wanted to kill myself. And since then, it's been several months. I don't think I've had more than a brief fleeting thought, and it totally shut off that whole thought pattern that I used to have around it. And there are a lot of other people who are experiencing the same thing, really thankfully. So if nothing else, I'm deeply grateful that this treatment like shut that part of my brain off. So
Wow. Man, that's wild. First of all, I know that thanks for sharing that. I know that's a hard thing for a lot of people to talk about. And I think just you sharing that is really beneficial to people who might be struggling with the same types of things. I remember once listening to the first time that I ever heard of microdosing. It was a woman who had kind of a similar story of like constant thought of suicide. And with microdosing, you don't even hit that trip like you're
sure,
talking
right.
about. Like you hit, it's like, so it's like day one, it's like nothing. Day two, it's nothing, and it's just. But after it starts like kind of taking effect, she's like, I realized something changed the day that I looked out my window and saw a tree that I've seen every single day and never thought about. And I looked out and I thought, God, that tree is really beautiful. And
Yeah.
she's like, I hadn't felt that way about anything in 10 years. And it was
Hmm.
like, wow, that's like moving. And so hearing like
Hmm.
the experiences that people have with things like with microdosing, and it's it's great. It's so like, and it's just wonderful to hear that people are starting to be able to do studies on it. I mean, you've been unable to study it for so long, and especially in mass. Like, I mean, how many people in this country are microdosing, and you can't even group them all together for a study because they can't let you know. They have to keep it a secret in some way.
For sure. I mean, we can thank kind of the 1980s war on drugs for like these ridiculous like blanket policies that kind of, permanently shut off, looking at certain things, and stigmatized, certain classes, or certain, drugs or plants, to the point where, no, we don't want to consider that because, well, it's already been classified as something. And so just this bad. And for me, I think where I got interested in microdosing was like, well, all things considered, I would prefer something natural versus synthetic. And so the ketamine is, synthetic. I would prefer something, that Jesus made. Thank you for magic mushrooms and weed. And no, but much like you said in that story, the ketamine kind of interrupted my thought pattern. And I will say that the one time that I did try mushrooms, the very next morning was the first morning I woke up, and the first thoughts on my mind were just positive and optimistic. I remember telling myself like, "Whoa, this is what this feels." I just woke up feeling like not sad. Woke up feeling not depressed. And for people that have real deep depression, it's that feeling when you first open your eyes in the morning that you're greeted with, and it's just so overwhelming because it's there from the beginning. And that one day after I first tried mushrooms, for just to not have that heaviness there was the most amazing thing in the world. But yeah, with all the stigma, I was slow to try different things. But actually, just this past Sunday was the 28th anniversary of when my grandfather died by completed suicide when I was 17 years old. And so, knowing that if you've had a completed suicide in the family, that your risk is doubled essentially. I knew that for me, I was going to leave no stone unturned. Didn't care how much it cost or what I had to do to like get a certain treatment. Didn't care if it's stigmatized. Didn't care if whatever. That I was going to fight this with everything in me. And I'm starting to feel glimpses of the old me come back, and I just miss life. I miss engaging with my readers. I miss living. I miss being happy, and I am just ready to kind of step back into things. I mean, this is the first interview I've done in 2 years, actually. So,
wow, man, that's wild. It's funny when you obviously it's. I mean, as someone who had been following your work for a number of years, I was like, I obviously noticing the lapse in blog posts. Sure. It's like, it's like they maybe 6 months, and then it's like, and then I mean, that's the kind of you had no idea what's going on with people. So that's that's wild to hear, man.
And part of it is you kind of become overwhelmed, like shame, embarrassment. It's like, geez, I haven't said anything in 6 months. Like, why now? And it's like, geez, I kind of dropped the ball in my own life, and like in public view of thousands and thousands of people. So there's like no way to just like discreetly step back in and be like, nothing ever happened. So.
Yeah. Do you plan on? Do you plan on writing about this and your experiences and stuff like that?
Definitely. I'm so anxious to get back to writing. It's such a difficult career and job, as in that being somebody who creates. It comes from a certain energy inside of you. And so when you battle into depression or when the stars aren't aligned, it's not like you can't just show up to work and create because you have to. You create because like you have no other. You create because like I have no choice but to not let this thing be born that's inside of me. Mm-hmm. And so I think that really compounded my grief and depression. Because it's like, okay, great, all right, I'm depressed. Gone through a divorce. My career's kind of been on pause. And it just made it all the harder to create and to kind of step back into life. But I'm desperately wanting to, I really want to do some more videos again. I guess you younger kids use something called TikTok, they say.
God, I can't. I have not been able to like bring myself to get into, as we're trying to, like, I don't know, we hit different social platforms, media platforms. And I'm like, how am I supposed to just hold a video, like a camera up in front of my face and just say stuff and have anyone give a shit? I can't, like, the idea of doing that on the fly and trying to use TikTok is really, I'm struggling with that one too, man. So
no, for sure.
You're not alone.
Yeah. Maybe you should start out with some of the dances, the white girl dances where they do their elbows a lot.
Right. So Ben, while we're talking about creating and how things are few and far between, I do want to bring up the piece that you wrote. It's like a year ago, and then you made updates to it last June, and it was called, for our listeners, and I want to put this in our show notes because I think this is just one of the most, I'm obsessed with it. I think it's one of the funnest pieces I've ever read on the subject of end times, to circle back to the start of the conversation here, where you wrote a piece called "Could American Evangelicals Spot the Antichrist? Here are the biblical predictions." And you take 30, I think it was 34, 35 of the big end times passages, and spin them in a way that redirects the Antichrist onto their Lord and Savior, Donald Trump. So I was...
Yeah. And that was probably one of my favorite pieces that I've ever produced as well. And, it started out, totally different. And I just kind of woke up one day and I was like, wouldn't it be funny if I wrote a piece and, with a couple of characteristics of the Antichrist and made it look like Donald Trump. And I was like, okay, let's do this. And so I kind of sat down and I was like, well, all right, let me read up on all the Antichrist passages that evangelicals, would say point to the Antichrist. And I started just reading up on them. And then I'm like, well, this post isn't being written today. This is going to take more research. And, I ended up spending a month on that one blog post researching it. It was not hastily thrown together or even that much spin, in that this became a case where I freaked myself out. It would be like if you made a horror movie and like you were there when it was all filmed, but you still can't sleep at night because of the thing you made yourself. But no, I just started reading and looking at it just as a narrative, as they described this character in narrative fashion. I was just stunned, and I couldn't even believe it. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. Okay, the Antichrist will literally rise to power with fewer followers. He will win through outside collusion, and he will use deceit, to gain, that position. I was like, okay, and then the Antichrist will do this. He will uniquely profit off of that position in a way like nobody before him could profit off of it. And then you just start going on and on. And then you start reading in Revelation, and also in Daniel, and it says, and I heard him speaking great things and things that were greater than his opponents. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I'm like, this is the weirdest shit ever. And it was just, I don't know. It was just astounding. You go through the narrative, and all I will say is I don't believe this stuff. But if there is an Antichrist, he's going to be so dang similar to Trump because this is truly like the article is actually describing like the characteristics of the Antichrist. So if it's not Trump, it's somebody who sure as hell looks a whole lot like him.
It makes to your credit, it looks less likely every day that it is in fact Obama.
Yeah. It's funny because you look. What's also astounding about it is when you're looking at it, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, it's pointing at all the types of characteristics that would make a person, quote unquote, the Antichrist, and I'm like, with the belief that they're actually talking about something at that time, I'm like, it's kind of nice to know that those traits have always been around too, right? You're not like, this isn't the first time we've experienced something with someone who has this much objective moral failure. And that's another one of your points was like the moral failure behind this. There'll be like a debaucherous person who lacks character, and it's like the amount of people who are just like excused that. And he played it right because it was like he accepted Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior to get people like Franklin Graham on board, and it was like, man, he played his moves right to get that 80% that he needed, and it fucking worked like
it's
magic.
Still astounding though, because I've got to tell you, even if I had been an evangelical when he came on the scene, and even if I had still been a Republican, I would not have like been okay with that crap. I mean, I actually just talked to a military buddy of mine a few weeks ago that I haven't talked to in 10 years. And back the last time he had talked to me, I was a right-wing conservative. He's like, man, I'll tell you what, when Trump came president, the first thing that came to mind, I said, there's no way Ben's okay with this shit.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, oh, good. I'm glad. You know, I was hoping I wasn't, just thinking, trying to, tell myself, don't worry, you wouldn't have gone along with them. But it was good to know that like somebody who knew me didn't think that. But there's just something unique about. Never in my wildest dreams did I think the same people at Word of Life who were so concerned that you be walking 3 feet apart so as to not give any appearance of evil. Like, and where like, oh man, like clearly your repentance wasn't enough. If you were to tell me that one day these guys would not just support somebody, but support them with the enthusiasm, just undying. I can't even get the words out because it's still so shocking that the people who raised me that way would turn to him. And that's one of the ways I connected with, my own piece there on the Antichrist, because where it talks about how that, people of God will be given over and almost start acting like they're delusional. And it says they will hate the truth. And I'm like, man, this is happening right now, folks. And y'all always said it was going to be me and listening to that rock music that did it. But no, it was you and Donald Trump.
It's funny. We've talked about it so many times, but like I feel like the Trump years really showed with absolute clarity like what's most important to those people, like so many people like that would say up and down that Christianity and their faith and stuff like that is the most important thing in their life.
They're lying.
Like, yeah, over and over again, you see them choose, that political ideology that lines up with the way that they want to live over their faith, abjectly over things in the Bible. What was funny to me reading your blog post was like there's so many different criteria for the Antichrist and what he does and his characteristics and things like that. I was thinking back on it and I'm like, man, the only ones that we ever really talked about in depth at church and stuff were, well, he's gonna come on board and like promote unity across the globe, and he's gonna establish peace with Israel. It was like all these things that are actually good, and that was the things that we were worried about. Like anybody who talked too much about world peace and stuff are like, I don't know about that guy.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're so right. No, those were the things that they majored on, and some of those are just weren't even in the narrative. But no, when you look at it, it's just it's truly amazing. But I mean, I'd never seen a president before who was just so clearly fraudulent in his faith. We have had presidents of both parties who I believe, and I served presidents under both parties, in the military, and I believe, that those men who served in those positions, whether liberal or conservative, truly loved America. I think, men, like George W. Bush, Jimmy Carter, very sincere and devout Christians, equally so, very, very much Christians. And I never imagined that they would fawn over somebody who was so clearly faking it. This guy does not give a shit about Christianity.
Yeah, that was one of the clear aspects of his personality to me, is that it was just to be able to, you have to trick yourself into believing that he cared about Christianity. I mean, it's like, I'm sure there's going to be some people who listen to this that are very bothered by that statement, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around. Like, well, it's one of the things that like you, Ben, I feel like there's a lot of similarities in our connection to, because I'm still part of the Christian faith. I have a church, like a faith community, a church that I participate in. And, a lot of my ability to maintain a connection to it is because of my interest in Jesus as well, where it's just like the truth to power, breaking down all the walls that religion creates. Like there's so much about him that I think is beautiful and necessary. And the people throughout history that I have that you're the most moved by when you read, not that like your Gandhi or your like Martin Luther King Jr.'s, when they're talking about like the path to peace, the move forward. Of course, it sounds like sometimes a little silly for a white guy who's only 33 to be talking about Martin Luther King Jr. as though I have any idea what it was like to actually be in his position. But when you hear his words and his speeches and its connection back to Jesus, it's like, man, the power is there. The power is in that belief system, that idea. So if to me that's truth, which is what like, and it's like, so like, that's what makes the Christ, I guess, is like that. It's communicating that truth that's like comes like deep from within our universe in some way. So like when you hear that from anybody at any point, it moves me. And then you hear someone like Donald Trump start talking and you're like, what? Like, that's what you're confusing with Christianity. That's what you're confusing with the character that supposedly moved us to faith. It's definitely saddening.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know a tree by its fruit, and it's not good fruit. But no, you're right. There's, I've often said, about Jesus, to my atheist friends, if I found out that Jesus wasn't divine or this or that, I'm still going to follow Jesus, because the way of Jesus, the way of living, is the very best way I know how to live. And so even if I'm wrong about who I believe he is, because I too am still a person of faith and still, very much believe in Jesus and all of that stuff. But even if that stuff were not true, or could be proven untrue, I'm still going to follow him, because I so believe in the way he lived, a life of compassion and empathy and service and things like that. So yeah, I'm on the Jesus train, not the Trump train.
Yeah.
Hey, when you were talking about the church that, the group that you had to leave after the deal with this, it was Sudanese refugees, right?
Congolese.
Congolese, my bad. You said you were a teaching elder in that church.
Teaching elder in the one before that. Sorry.
Okay. Was there conflict between you and any of the other elders over some of your more progressive thoughts on things, or were they all kind of like-minded?
Okay. So there's no conflict when I was in the Congolese church. We were just hanging out refugees. They didn't even know who I was, which I loved. But back in my regular church, which was before that, was there conflict? Yeah. I mean, it wasn't direct conflict. You could feel the tension, in that one of the other elders owned a concealed carry company that taught people and helped them get their license to concealed carry weapons. And so even without saying it, like, here I am, like, very publicly, leading a charge, online, for thousands of people, like helping to convert them over to nonviolence in the way of Jesus. You could feel the tension in the air, with an elder that you knew was packing, and spent his time teaching others to pack. So it was rough. So, and I knew that, so the difficult thing is I didn't want to cause any trouble. I was processing my ideas and stuff like that online, but in church, man, I was preaching sermons that there's no reason why anybody should have had an issue with them. Like I'm not trying to blow anybody's mind. I was like straight up preaching Jesus, like totally legitimately real deal Jesus. And Jesus himself, certainly created some of the tension. Because they asked me to, preach through Matthew. It's like, okay, you asked for it. Here's what it says.
Yeah, pretty early on, you get to the Sermon on the Mount, and that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, for sure.
Man. Well, Ben, we really appreciate your time, your story. This went in directions I didn't expect it to. I honestly was not expecting to go onto a conversation about microdosing and things like that. Yeah. And we thought when we were going to have this conversation. So.
If there's a next time, let's just talk about drugs.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciate it, and I'm really glad that that the conversations were able to go that way. Because, like you said, I'm sure that there are plenty of people out there who both quietly or not quietly struggle with depression and suicidality and grief and all of that stuff. And so I just wanted to be really intentional about what life has been like, and be really transparent about that, in hopes that others out there will do whatever they can do to try to fight those urges and to push a path towards healing as well. But no, I really appreciate being on with you guys. It's good to reminisce and talk about things, and hopefully we'll see you guys online here in the future.
Yeah. As things are looking up, I'm excited to see whatever it is that you got, whatever you got cooking up, whatever comes down the pipeline. I'll be around for it.
Awesome. I'm excited too. We'll both figure out what that's going to be. No, I'm ready to get back to life. I miss living, and I miss.
That's awesome, man.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will see you next time.